Hello, I'm Nerdzilla, and today I'll be talking to you about the history of handhelds. So, let's start all the way back in 1979. Gunpei Yokoi, which was the creator of the Game Boy, Virtual Boy, and the Game & Watch. So, Gunpei Yokoi was on a train. He saw a man playing with a calculator, electronic calculator. And Gunpei Yokoi thought that as a good idea. So he went to Nintendo. He said, let's make a handheld system so you can bring games on the go. And it was a great idea. So probably a year later, in 1980, the golden age of video games just started. Not even Donkey Kong was out yet. The Game & Watch series was marketed for the first time, and it was actually, no, when I mean marketed, I mean like commercial-wise. It was first on commercial in 1980, and that blew people's minds that you can bring games on the go. I mean, that was like, so the first game came out, and that was Ball. Now, it wasn't like every video game. It wasn't like any video game. They had a background. Well, for the first one, they didn't have a background, but later they did. For the first time, they had light up pictures. They had like a overlay, and whenever when you tap the buttons, it responses and it lights up. So people liked it. Either way, if the graphics were not that good, people liked it. Pong was like GTA back then. That was like crazy. Now I'm getting off topic. So, Game & Watch was like, okay, they kept coming out with new games for that system, for Game & Watch. And that was awesome. And people, and when the years went by, like in 1981, 1982, 1983, they already came out with thousands and thousands. Sales freaking went up all the way in the beginning in 1980. So so they added the simplest ones: Donkey Kong, Mario Brothers, Popeye, Snoopy, I think that's the name. Well, that's how cool it went up, and it's been there since like 1987 or 7, I think. But the Tire Electronics did the same thing. But I'm not talking about the Tire Electronics right now. That is going to be later. After this part of the Game & Watch. Now, I don't know what the last game is. So if you want to know, go search that on Google or something. I don't know. So that concludes the Game & Watch part of my video. Oh, by the way, one more thing. One more game. They also added The Legend of Zelda in there too. And Pac-Man. So where do we go? Now it's the Tire Electronic games. Tire Electronics were the same thing as the Game & Watch. Although people didn't like it that much as the Game & Watch. They thought the graphics were much better. The NES was out. And they kept going after the Game Boy. So this is much like focused on the arcade games than the games they made for the Game & Watch, because they made up their own games. Tiger Electronics copied arcade games from the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, they had it like, they even had, I think, they had it down to like no, they couldn't have the Legend of Zelda. It could have been around the time Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was out, but they didn't have it on there. So I don't know. If you want to check on Google again, that's your chance to go see that. So I don't know why people didn't like, bringing their arcade games on the go instead of kept making bad consoles. So our next chapter is finally the Game Boy. Now this is where it gets pretty cool. Oh boy, the Game Boy. Where do I start? Well, 1989, I know where to start. Gunpei Yokoi was making a comeback. Something called a Game Boy. And it came with a game called A Simple Word. I'll say a simple word, a simple name. Tetris. Yeah. Tetris. We all know Tetris. It's so wonderful. It's the best game ever. So I'm not gonna tell you all the games that was made for the system. I just want to say that people were going crazy about the Game Boy. I just want to tell you what the craze was like. People were like, oh my god, the graphics are much better. But the thing that lacked was color. So it had 4 AA batteries and it had 15 hours of battery life. That blew your mind, was it? Did it? So that's what concludes the Game Boy. Why here? I came out because it's much silent. So I know there's lots and lots. Wait a minute. There's lots and lots of more Game Boy games and consoles to come. But we can cover all the consoles, but we can't cover all the games. Now, most of them are pretty much the same. Some of them have like new games, I guess. There's some little handhelds in the middle that they don't really talk about. Yeah, so yeah, they have Game Boy Color, I guess. Game Boy Color that came out with color games, as you could see. Wait, you know what? There's two in the middle. It's a Pokemon Light and a Pokemon Pocket, not Pokemon. I'm getting mixed up. A Game Boy Pocket and a Game Boy Light. A Game Boy Light, you can actually turn a backlight on because they didn't have that in the actual original Game Boy. For the Game Boy Pocket, you could fit in your pocket, of course. Yeah. There's the Game Boy. I already said the Game Boy Color. Let's see. The Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance had cooler game. They had pretty much the same games. Mario, Zelda, the basic stuff. So they have, I don't know. They come out with movie. They come out with movie Game Boy Advance games, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, that had, you could do a lot. You could play a movie on that, which that was like the new thing. I think that was the coolest thing that people. I think that was the closest thing they could do, is taking a movie on the go before. So, what else? Let's see. They made, like, like they made a Game Boy Advance. Again, I'm talking about the Game Boy Advance. They made like a little swipe card. They had lots of accessories for the Game Boy Advance. They still didn't have a backlight yet, except the Game Boy Light. That they didn't have a backlight yet. So, where do I start again? Well, I mean, they have lots of different consoles. I can tell you, well, actually, I think they only made 2 more. I don't know. They kept making different colors, and, it was much cooler each time. And I think the Game Boy Advance was 16-bit instead of 8-bit, like the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy, and the original Game Boy, and all the ones in the middle. So, and it had bigger screen. They had, like, they had a Game Boy Advance SP. Now the cool thing is you could play like every game. Like you have Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, Game Boy Advance games, the movie carts, and, well, that's it. They didn't make anything else. So, well, oh, the Game Boy Micro. The Game Boy Micro was a little small. Oh, by the way, they did add a backlight on the Game Boy Advance SP and the Game Boy Micro. It's kind of like a original. It's just a Game Boy Advance, but a much smaller. And this is the shape. If I had, like, a picture, I can, like, show you, but it was, like, really small. And yeah. And let's just finish it off by actually saying that the same year the Game Boy Advance SP came out, a new console came out. I think you know what that is. The DS. Now the DS is still around today. They made so much, they've made so much, versions of it. It's ridiculous. They made an original DS. They made like a DS that can, like, you can play Game Boy Advance games and DS games. Like, yeah. So that was the first version. Then they made a DS that you can't play original. So that concludes the history of handhelds. I'm sorry I had to cut short. The DS is pretty much the same today. The DSi, the 3DS, the 3DS XL, the new 3DS XL. It's crazy. So, yeah. Bye, everyone.